on this computer. There we go. It's the old familiar friend of recording to the computer. Hi, for those people that are just watching the recording, this is the first tutorial for LAWS12059 Conveyancing, and we have a merry, happy crowd of eager students among us tonight. We are just about to kick off, and I thought I might share my messy screen with you all. And jump into just some preliminaries. Forgive me if you have already watched the introductory video, but I'll just briefly go through, you know, the foundational stuff for the unit so that you've got it from the horse's mouth, so to speak. That's an elegant phrase, isn't it? So, as I was saying before, this isn't really about all of the nuts and bolts of conveyancing. It's much more about the groovy law stuff. And if this slide seems familiar, then in all likelihood you have actually had a look at the introductory video. Generally speaking, we will cover about a chapter a week of Sharon Christensen's lengthy tome, Land Contracts in Queensland. Now, as I suggested, it really would be worthwhile, if you haven't sourced your text yet, I would recommend trying to grab a second-hand copy if you can, because this copy is kind of out of date. I mean, a lot of the fundamental law is good because, as you know, law moves quite slowly, particularly in the common law I'm talking about, moves quite slowly in real property. There are seismic shifts every now and again, but the thing that kind of dates this text is the legislation, and also the fact that it talks about editions of the REIQ contract that are obviously out of date now. So before you go spending $150 on a brand new one of these, there are some available in the library, and I would also encourage you to go online to the CQU textbook Facebook group. Is any of you members of that? Do you all know about that Facebook group? I'm getting enthusiastic nods. Yeah, yep. Okay. Yeah, that's really good, because if you can pick up a cheapie, don't throw away $150 on it. Really, it's not, you know, it's not necessary. So that is the text we will be using. The authors are all eminent authors in their field, and very well respected. The issue is, I guess, with authors that are very erudite, is that sometimes they do tend to waffle on about about topics, and I find sometimes, you know, they say something in 5 pages when they could quite happily say it in 2. So you kind of have to pick and choose. I think that we do use Sharon Christensen's text for contract as well, although that will change next year. You might be happy to know. So it will test your skim reading skills, this text. I'll endeavour in my videos to give you a reasonably good heads up as to what I think is the important stuff that you need to get out of each chapter. And then I'll leave it to you to do, you know, an assessment of how deeply you delve into the text from there. So where they start to, as a general point, I will just say, you know, where they start to waffle on and on and on about acts that have been repealed or the history of how legislation got to a certain point, you know, I think you can safely skim read that stuff. But as I said, you know, I'll give you a fairly good heads up in terms of the chapter's content that I need you to focus on. And certainly in terms of your second assessment and your third assessment, which we'll talk about in just a minute, if you've had me for contract, you know that I give you fairly detailed instructions in terms of what I want you to focus on for the assessment. I don't ever assess by ambush. I always make sure that everybody knows exactly what's required up front, and so there shouldn't be any worries so far as that is concerned. So that's the text. The other thing that is not perhaps optimal about the text, and I'm just being picky really, but as you can see from my big picture slide there, it doesn't, I'm a big believer in timelines. Do you know what I mean? Nice chronological ordering of things in the universe makes things seem much more easy to digest. But for some reason, they haven't done that this way with this text. And so what we have is a nice little foundational couple of chapters at the beginning, you know, ethics and duties, and there's a little bit of revision of the Australian consumer law there. So that makes sense there. Then we've got weeks 3 and 4 disclosure. That's also very sensible to have early on in the text. And then all of a sudden in weeks 5 and 6, you get kind of formation of contract and deposit. I'm unsure whether that needs to stay there, but anyway, week 7 then flips back to description of subject matter. Then it goes to contract to completion, and then it swings back round to special conditions and finally remedies. I think if I was the editor, I probably would have said to them, you know, put all of the pre-contractual stuff together, and then talk about, you know, formation of contract, then contract completion, and then remedies. Probably made a little bit more chronological sense to me. But in any event, we'll run with it how we have it at the moment. We'll follow the text. And then as I'm going through and developing the materials, you know, I'll kind of reassess that in the back half of the unit, because it won't really be affected until the latter part of the unit, certainly after your first assessment. So if I think things need to be wangled around, then I guess we can do some shuffling if we need to do so. So yeah, that's the general content of the unit. In terms of assessment, 3 assessments, a 20% written, a 30% written, and a 50% take-home paper. Okay, all of this stuff's in the introductory video, but the first written assessment's already up on Moodle. That one's due next month, 10th of August, so just under a month to do that one. I'm hoping that you like this little assessment. It's just a little baby 1400 word mock article for Proctor. So you need to imagine that you are writing a little article for Proctor, and we're concentrating on the really early unit stuff. So you can get cracking on that like right now if you want to kind of get things under control for this unit and squared away. So it's already up, all the rubric and everything's all on Moodle, ready, set to go for you. So happy for you to get creative. I know sometimes in contract I'll get people designing these fancy pictures and borders around their assignments and all sorts of things. That is not mandatory for a good mark in this assessment at all, in the first assessment. But for the creative people out there, if you do want to get creative in terms of presenting that little mock article for Proctor, then go ahead, knock yourself out, knock me out. It'll be interesting little relief from marking to see some visuals and some graphics in there from you guys. In terms of that article, it probably would pay you to go and have a little look at some articles on Proctor. There are some up just free to look at online. And I think that I might have even put a link there for you to an article or two on Proctor. So just have a bit of a poke about, see what you can find in terms of, you know, the way that they like things set out. And you can get cracking on that one as soon as you want, really. The 30% I won't release until after the first assignment has been due. I normally do that just because otherwise I find students get a bit stressed. So I tend to just drip feed you to keep the stress under control. But that'll be a more traditional 30% written assessment, just an ordinary problem-based assessment, that one. If you haven't had me before for contract or for any other of the electives that I take, then maybe before you do the written assessment, so assessment 2 and the take-home paper, which will both be problem-based, I would suggest that you have a look at my IRAC top tips document, which is on Moodle for you to download if you wish to do so, revised and expanded edition for you all. I think it's running to about 12 pages now, maybe more. And I find that same top tips document is now popping up in a lot of other units as well. So I'm getting my tentacles out there. John Milburn took this unit last time round. John's lovely. I don't know if any of you have had John for Intro to Law or any other units. He's lovely. He's also, when he did this unit, he did a written assessment guide also and a little sample document, and both of those are also up on Moodle for you to have a quick look at before you do your assessment 2 and 3. For assessment 3, I'm gathering that most of you guys have had take-home papers before. Yes, no, yes, yeah, sweet. So you know what the drill is. Everything's pretty much moving to take-home papers now, thankfully. We had this marvelous little circle of events with take-home papers. When we first started off the online degree, pretty much everything was a take-home paper, and it was great. And then the LPAB said to us, oh no, we have to combat this whole contract cheating business. We can't have take-home papers. It's just asking for disaster and contract cheating and all sorts of shenanigans to go on. And so they made us institute all of these invigilated exams. And I'm guessing that some of you had to trudge through invigilated exams in the course of your degree. Oh man, and wasn't that fun? Gradually they're being phased out again now though. So thankfully, I think, because in an online degree, really, it's super important for you guys to have like maximum flexibility to enable you to get on with the life that you have to lead and fit in study where you can. So that 50% take home is going to be released in the very end of the exam period. So it'll be released on Friday the 23rd of October, and you'll have to hand it up on the Saturday. So I've set it up that way for those of us that, you know, work full time. You've still got the Saturday to try and get your paper done, so it's not due until 5 p.m. on the Saturday evening. So that's the exam. In my take-home papers, and particularly because this is a second year elective and you should all be very, very familiar with AGLC citation method now, I still do require citations to be done properly in your take-home paper. Okay, so I'll just flag that for you now. You still have a full 24 hours, and you know, I'll be designing that assessment to be done well and truly within a 24-hour period, and so I will expect that you will cite properly. Okay. I appreciate that in an invigilated exam you don't have to, but invigilated exams are only 3 hours, so I will expect proper citations there. The only other thing that I really wanted to say of a boring, mundane nature was the weekly reading for this unit. And that kind of flows on. You can gather what I'm going to say after that kind of build up to the text, really, can't you? Generally, there's a chapter a week, but if you leave it and just read a chapter a week, there's a couple of issues. Some of the chapters are so long, you will be tearing your hair out and your eyes will be bleeding by the end of that week. So I would suggest, and the other issue is that there's 1 week, at least towards the back end of the unit, where there's 2 chapters that are set for that week. I think it's week 8. So to avoid, those hair pulling out moments, if you follow my detailed reading plan that I put on Moodle, I think you'll be right. That if you follow my plan, you should end up with around about 50 odd pages of reading a week. Don't just leave it to the last minute. Do try and keep up with my reading plan. And I think it will save you a lot of stress, and it will keep your eyeballs in functional mode. Okay, so that's the reading for the unit. I know every lecturer says this stuff, but yeah, whatever. If you try and keep up with the reading plan, I do think that'd be useful. Now, was there any queries about any of that stuff?
Just a quick one in regards to the reading plan, Amanda. Is it based, which version of the textbook is it based on? Because it doesn't actually say in the reading plan, because I've downloaded it.
Oh, the reading plan is based on the 4th edition. That's the most recent edition of the text. And so, yeah, it's 2016.
Yeah, 2016. That's the version I've got. Yeah, oh, good. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I do apologise for that, but there's nothing out there that's probably as detailed as Sharon's book. And the other thing was that I jumped into this unit at the very last moment after the AIMS deadline for changing texts. So I couldn't really do anything about the textbook that we have at this point. But like I said, it's a very detailed and very thorough text. So, it's a good one. Just be mindful, and I will update you where the text needs updating. Okay. So, and the principal way that I will do that updating for you, given that I have jumped into the unit at the last moment, will be via, I'm sorry to say it, probably tweaks to the study guides. So I don't know if any of you guys, are any of you guys of the variety of student that downloads all of the study guides at the beginning of term?
Yeah, that's me.
Okay, all right. I could see you wincing in pain there, Tanya. What I might do is, if I tweak anything, because you'll see that I have tweaked, I put a forum post up just a day or two ago that I tweaked a couple of them. What I will do from now on, Tanya, is if I do tweak anything, I'll do it all in markup mode, so that if you've printed them, you can easily see what I've added in, and you can just make a hand amendment on your printed copy. Does that work?
Yeah, that works. I was going to say, I think when you put up the original post, at that stage, I'd only printed the first 2 weeks anyway, and then I did stop, and I just thought I'll wait until a little bit further in.
Yeah, well, that's what I'll do. I'm up to the end of week 4 now. So we're good for up to week 4. And then I will have the videos up to week 4 on Moodle for you by the end of this weekend. So I'm aiming to stay at least 2 weeks ahead in terms of the videos for you. And whatever tweaking needs to be done with study guides. Apologies, but as I said, I was this was a hospital pass, so we're doing it on the fly, folks. Nothing like flying by the seat of your pants. So yeah, that's the way we'll run it. Any other queries about the boring, mundane bits?
AJ, I've just got a question about the first assignment.
Yeah.
The Proctor articles are all different formats depending on what heading they're under. Is it okay for us to do a opinion piece based on the topic, or is there any restrictions on that?
No, not really. As long as you can put your 1,400 words into a form that satisfies the rubric, that's the main criteria. Then no, it's up to you. Opinion piece is fine. I don't mind if you write. Generally speaking, and I drum this, if you had me for contract law, you know I drum this into students all the time. Don't ever write in the first person. Never say I. It's not about you. It's about, you have to use the third person in law because it's very formal. But this is, this is an article in Proctor. And so if you're doing an opinion piece, sure. I don't mind if you couch it in I/we, or whether you use the traditional, format. It's up to you. There is a rubric in the task sheet. So as long as you're following the components in the rubric, go for gold.
Thank you.
No problemo. Any other queries? No.
So with assignment 1, AJ, I know you talked a little bit about before visuals and graphics, and I've been on to Proctor and had a bit of a look, and and you can lay it out in terms of their columns, and that's okay. So it looks like the real deal, or yeah.
Yes, that would be awesome. That would be great.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other queries? And if you have a look at the submission, the author submission instructions, and you wanted to actually go ahead and submit your article to Proctor, hey, why not? Why not? Says she with an eye for students chock full of CVs with awesome publications on them. Any other queries?
AJ, I was trying to find those guidelines for submissions, and Nicholas might be able to help because he's tech savvy. I seem to find a bit of a loop. The QLS site said it's on the Proctor site, and then the Proctor site said it's on the QLS site.
Oh no! Look, let me see if I can find them for you. If I can find them for you, I'll put them up.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Any other questions? Nope. Okie dokie. Wow, blank sheet. Has anyone had a look at I always feel slightly facetious saying this in the first week because everyone's so scrambling about trying to get everything organised, but has anyone managed to actually have a look at the tutorial problems?
Looked, yes. Thought about answering them? Not yet. and to answer that last question, if you go to qlsproctor.com.au, go to the bottom of the website, click on contact in the footer, and in the contact form, when you put all your details in, there's a drop-down menu that says inquiry type, and in inquiry type, you select content contributions.
Okay. Did we all get that, peeps? I'll have a fuss.
Nicholas, does that give you the style guide to submissions?
No, that's just for submitting your actual content if you want to submit it. It doesn't I don't think they're concerned so much about the style guide anymore, because if you have a look at their website, it looks like they're running it on a WordPress platform, which means they're going to reformat it to the website anyway. And then they would actually republish the website content within a document that they send out to everybody. So that'd be the art department anyway. It wouldn't be an issue.
Good. All righty. Oh, I forgot to, everyone's been on Teams before, haven't they? I didn't mention Teams. Has everybody been on Teams before? Yes?
No. And I'm glad you put it up, Amanda, because I've been itching to get in and learn that technology as well.
Yay!
It's hard to do without having other people to do it with, so it's in there.
And I guess you can, you'd just be a bit lonely.
Yeah, it's quite easy for those that haven't used it. Once you're logged in, think about writing a post like you do in Facebook, except all the icons being, instead of them being at the top, like a Word document, they're underneath it. So all your attachments and videos and images, it's all there. It's really, really easy to use.
Yeah. For those lovely people at home, we are talking about the collaboration platform that we have attached to our unit. Those of you that had me for contract will know that I normally run a Facebook group alongside my units, but the university is offering Microsoft Teams now, and as Nick said, you know, it's very, very, it has all the look and feel of social media. So it's really, and it's linked right there off of Moodle, which is great. And if you click that, I'll just show the folks at home in case they haven't actually gotten onto Teams before. So you'll come up with all of your different teams that you're in, and mine is by far the most attractive. Sorry, first week humour, what can I say? And then if you click on that, you will see the general forum comes up first. It just defaults to the general forum. And that's what you'll see. But the social chit chat where everything happens is the other channel there. And so this is where you can see everyone's been posting and just getting to know each other. I posted some photos. So if you want to hop in there and say hello to your peers, your colleagues, it's a great idea, good way to, you know, meet people to form study groups for assignments and stuff like that.
Amanda, can I just pass a quick comment? I noticed in your video you showed where there's that drop-down menu and it says click on Microsoft Teams for people to access the Teams page.
Yeah.
That is an actual plugin that gets plugged into Moodle after you've joined Teams. So those that are looking for the Teams link won't find that. They won't find it. So can I suggest that you put a link inside of Moodle, like a normal link you do for Zoom, that they can click on to activate it. And then once it's activated, that box will show up at the top right-hand corner of their Moodle page from that point on.
Oh, really? Tazak told me it was just going to pop up in people's Moodle page automatically.
Yeah, it does pop up there, but if you think about it from a logic standpoint, what is there to pop up unless you've already activated Teams?
Okay, so people have to jump on and activate Teams.
Yeah, so if I just put in the link in the chat as an example, so that link there, if you're logged, and this is crucial, you need to be, if you're logged into your CQU email address,
yeah,
before you click on that link, it will then take you immediately to Teams. It will activate the plugin into Moodle and set up everything else automatically in one go.
Oh, that's great. Did we all get that?
Probably not, but you can put it. Yeah.
So what about if I'll pop this into the browser here so that the people at home can see it.
The main point there is that you have to be logged on to the CQU environment.
Yeah, you need to be.
I have Teams that, because we're isolation for work, And I come on to that one as soon as I click on yours. And I'm looking around, and then I had to get out, log into CQU, and then call it up, and then I found it.
Ah, right. Well, hopefully the folks at home aren't too confused. And please do hop on, introduce yourself. Feel free to ask me any questions that you need in terms of the unit content. I would prefer actually that everyone, whatever questions need to be raised, I mean, feel free to email me personally if you need to, but generally speaking, most people, especially about assignment and material content, a lot of people will be having the same kinds of questions as yourself. So jump into Teams, ask the question. That way everyone gets the benefit of the discussion that flows out of that question. So do use Teams, and you're my little guinea pigs because I haven't run a Teams website off of my Moodle page before. So I'm going to do a little survey at the end and see what you all think. Okay, so that's that. Now, in terms of the first tutorial, let's have a wee looky. What the first tutorial problem asks is here. Let me just copy the text of that. We'll just quickly run through these, and I'll put my answer guide up for you at the end of each week, so that those people that didn't make the tutorial have the tutorial recording and the answer guide as well. So I'll put our collaborative notes up for other people. Okay, hit me with it. Explain the operation of clause 10.4 in the REI contract for houses and land, 16th edition. Now make sure, people, you're all looking at the 16th edition, which is up on Moodle. Do not use the old outdated versions. The text talks about the 11th edition, but we'll be talking about the 16th edition when we're talking in our tutorials, okay? So, 10.4, what's 10.4 all about? Anyone manage to have a look at that? Does anyone go and have a look at the REIQ contract on Moodle?
Yep, it's all about notices.
Sweet, it sure is. And what does 10.42 tell us?
Notices may be given and received by the parties' solicitors.
Yes, exactly. And 10.47? It's a deeming provision.
Yep, the given by the solicitor means it's actually given on the party's authority.
Yep. Yep. Notices or other written communications by a party's solicitor will be treated as given with that party's authority.
Did I hear you say in the introductory Prezi when you were talking about that, though, that it's not necessarily just the solicitor? It could be anyone in the solicitor's office that has been granted, let's say, powers by the solicitor to conduct business for the solicitor as well. Was that correct?
That under the contract, the stipulation is solicitor. But if you think about at general law, because there's ostensible authority, principles of ostensible authority that flow from the contract, and there are principles of ostensible authority that flow just at general law. Okay, so in parallel to the contract. And if you think about cases that you did in contract law, like Legione and Haitley, remember poor old, what was her name? Miss Williams, the faithful secretary at McPherson and Kelly. The buyer's solicitor rings up and says, we need an extension. And she says, I think that'll be okay. I'll just have to get instructions. Poor lady. Then she gets dragged through the courts. So, you know, the issue there is that, she may well have been held to have bound her seller, but the issue was that what she actually said wasn't clear enough to indicate affirmatively that the seller would in fact grant the extension, because she said she'd have to get instructions. And also they hummed and hawed about her saying, oh, I think that will be okay.
Yeah,
All
which is different from her actually knowing based on instructions, right?
That's right. So she didn't say, oh, yes, that's fine, in which case the seller would have been in a pickle, because there is that ostensible authority that would flow from someone in her position, so the court said. So, yeah, scary position. When I was, you know, a newbie on the block, this kind of thing used to scare me stupid. Because it's a whole lot of authority, really, isn't it? And it just does make you very cautious about any dealings that you have with the other side. And, you know, salient lessons to be learnt there from poor old Miss Williams in Legion and Hately, isn't there? You've got to be prepared before you speak to the other side, and you've got to know what you're talking about when you're talking to the other side. You have to know your client's instructions, most importantly. So, yeah, salient lesson there. But how does PASCUF kind of cut across that? Very inconveniently, might I add.
This was the case of the disclosure statement, wasn't it, that was not signed by anybody. But then they were stating that the letter should be sufficient to cover the signing of the disclosure statement as being sent with authority.
Yes, and did it? Was it sufficient?
No, but then they went under the legislation for the Body Corporate and Community Management Act, and it was under that they said there was not sufficient notice.
That's right. It wasn't sufficient as the
authority.
Yeah, the signature on the letter. So what happened was you had like a covering letter, and then you had the disclosure statement kind of clipped to that, and there was a couple, and also the contract as well, and all of that was sent out under cover of the solicitor's letter. And the buyer was having troubles and wanted to back out. I mean, they had difficulty finding finance, and they were given an extension on the finance date, and an extension on, or was it extension on the settlement date? They were having troubles anyway. And they ultimately, my reading of it between the lines is they just wanted to back out. They just had enough. And so conveniently, their eagle-eyed lawyer had read the legislation, and the legislation said that you needed to have a signed disclosure statement. Not only did you have to have a signed disclosure statement provided to the buyer, but you had to have a signed disclosure statement provided to the buyer before entry into the contract. Okay, so they fell down because there was no signed disclosure statement. But there was also this issue, and this crops up later on as well. There was also this issue of, having sent everything, it wasn't before the contract was concluded, as the legislation required. So the buyer could back out scot-free. And in fact, not only did they back out scot-free, they got their deposit back, and they got costs in the matter as well awarded to them. So, salient lesson, yes, solicitors do, generally speaking, bind their clients when they're, acting with that ostensible authority and also contractual authority under 10.4. But where you have legislation that cuts across this, particularly consumer protection legislation, which they said the BCCMA was, then they're going to interpret that legislation fairly, strictly. And where it says you've got to have something signed, nothing but an express authority from the seller to their lawyer to sign the documents for the purposes of the BCCMA is going to do. Okay.
It's interesting that you use that word express authority, because at the moment, not to cut across, but I'm doing jurisprudence as well. And one of the issues there they talk about very much is the authority of the law. And if it doesn't have an express authority from its originator, then just because somebody says it's a law doesn't mean it is. And I think what you're saying here is it's the same principle. Just because someone said you've got to do X, Y, and Z is fine. But if you don't do X, Y, and Z in the right order, in line with the statute and legislation, it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant.
Yes, and I'm glad you brought that up, because, you know, it really highlights something about this unit that everyone would do very well to take note of. And that is to be an absolute stickler for adhering to due process, whether that is process as set out in the general law or whether it is the process set out in the contract. You must be a real eagle-eyed stickler for detail. And if you don't do things by the letter, unfortunately, conveyancing is one of those areas of the law where the parties' relationships change on women. I think I've already said this in my week's 1 or 2 video. Parties change, you know, everyone's happy, smiling, holding hands to start with, handshake, contract formed, no problem. You know, we're going to get this deal done quickly, nice and smooth. Things change on a whim. And particularly after, and the tipping point is often where search results come back to the buyer's solicitor, and then the buyer suddenly starts having second thoughts. These things change, and you've got to be ready to pivot on a dime. You know, anyone that says to you conveyancing is boring, they haven't done some of the exciting conveyances that I've done. I may get a chance to tell you about them, but you know, these are the things you've got to be prepared for. And often it is where your client wants to get out of a contract that your eagle-eyed attention to detail will serve you very well. And that's exactly what happened in Pascal. So I will just do a little mind dump here of my answer guide for you, because we pretty much said everything that I needed to say in that. All right. Salient lesson indeed, having your client specifically authorize you to sign any necessary disclosure statement. Also salient lesson in looking at the terms of the legislation to work out that you actually have to serve the thing before they've entered the contract.
Yeah, but I think that was back in the days of the Property Agents and Motor Dealers Act, though, because that was really stringent on order of contract that had to be forwarded and warning statements and things at the front, etc. I know there was a ton of contracts with that act that was around at the time.
Yeah, it still says that it's still a requirement that the statement be served pre-contract. So if your client has already formed the contract without giving the disclosure statement, then there will be problems.
In saying that, Amanda, can a disclosure statement be sent at the same time as a contract?
That's what happened here. And the problem was that the contract was signed, everything just was taken as read, you know. So this is the other thing, and I think it's even in one of your study guides, send things separately to avoid this kind of issue. It gets very panicky, doesn't it? But that's what you've got to do to make sure that everything's done cleanly. Okay, so your second problem, we got a grand sum total of about 6 minutes. This is really interesting because this is a little bit of revision, isn't it, for you? Are any of you guys doing land law as well this term?
I did land law about 3 semesters ago. In a way, I'm glad I did it, because there's a lot of information, as you said before, in the 2016 book that you can probably skip over for this unit, that honestly I wish we had back in land law, because this version makes a heck of a lot more sense than the version we were using back then.
Nabbit. Darn. Well, we get to do a little bit of a trip down memory lane with Fraser and Walker and Brescovar and Wall. And I gave you a little article to look at. I don't know whether you had a chance to look at the article. It was the sad and sorry story of the MasterChef lady that got diddled by the PEXA transaction. Did you have a look at that?
I had a quick look at that. That was really interesting. There was a lot of whose fault is this to begin with? Is it the lawyers? Is it PEXA? Is it the owner of the original email address? It seemed to go on forever until they decided, or PEXA decided, listen, we'll just pay up for the sake of face. Otherwise, we're going to be in serious trouble.
Yes. You know why, though? Because originally they took a very different tack, didn't they? And they said, oh, well, we'll fund you the difference until you've worked out what's happening with the professional indemnity insurance with your conveyancer. So originally PEXA wanted them to pay PEXA back.
Not only pay them back, PEXA wanted to take a hold over the property until such time that they'd actually paid it
back. Yeah, and there was a gag order in there as well, so they weren't meant to go and talk to the media or anything. Good on them for doing so, though. And the hilarious timing of it was that it was just before PEXA floated on the stock exchange. So PEXA wanted to do the right thing, obviously, because it didn't want to harm its chances on floating on the stock exchange. So it did a somersault and ended up, just paying them out.
Well, I think that was a wise business decision in the end.
Absolutely.
Think about that, paying out someone's house for, what was it, 200 and...
Oh, it was only partial. Yes, exactly.
250,000. Like, what would they have lost on the stock exchange float, mate? A couple of 100 million? Like, yeah, not worth it.
It's actually a real juggernaut, actually, PEXA is. I don't know how simply it's going to go. They're the new kids on the block. But big business, very, very big business. All right, before we jump into PEXA then, just briefly refresh my core middle-aged memory as to Fraser and Walker and Brescovar and Wall. Tell me a little bit about Fraser and Walker. Actually, no, don't. Tell me first about the principle of indefeasibility. What's indefeasibility all about? Because the question is, discuss how the theory of indefeasibility of title, as expounded in Fraser and Brescovar, is important to transactions concerning title land, and then comment on to what extent, if at all, this is affected by e-registration and e-conveyancing. So tell me a little brief recap. Anyone? Shall I give you a little memory jogger?
It's about Torrens title, isn't it?
The Torrens, that's right. So Richard Richard Torrens. Do you know any of the background of Sir Robert? It's fairly amusing. He was an Irishman who settled in South Australia. He set himself up as collector of customs. He got in on his father's kind of influence. And he was terribly unorthodox. He was sued by crew members of a ship for false imprisonment. He was engaged in libel actions. He was officially reprimanded for discourtesy to the Advocate General, and he was convicted of common assault. So all of the land law texts that set him up as this virtuous figure in the South Australian community, I'm not so sure that that's necessary. Perhaps that's looking back with rose-coloured glasses on. He wasn't terribly popular amongst his peers, but you know what? You can't knock what he did. The Torrens system is fairly incredible.
Seems to be happening through the entire Western world at the moment. With every statue, there's all the background coming out about, you know, yes, they were good at this, but we've all forgotten about what they did over here.
Everyone loves to dig up dirt, don't they?
Nothing's changed in the world. It's the same old.
I know, right?
Just a different colour of paint now. That's all it is.
It just comes to light quicker with social media. So Torrens created a registration system, 1858, core component of which is the theory of indefeasibility of title. So essentially what that does is it kicks to the curb the old system of registration of title, and it's now title by registration. So as soon as you get your title registered, your title is unassailable against the world. So you're protected from any other claims. In the old system, remember, everything depended on your chain of title, and your chain of title was only as good as the weakest link. And if there had been any shenanigans anywhere in any of the previous conveyances of that land, the subject of that title, then you as the purchaser took subject to all of the weaknesses in title, generally speaking. This is just a 2-minute summary. But under Torrens title registration, as soon as you get registered, that's it. Indefeasibility. So, except for, as I say, they're very limited exceptions, one of which is fraud. Generally speaking, fraud by the owner in the process of becoming registered is one of the exceptions to indefeasibility there. And that leads us into the discussion of Fraser and Walker. Anyone remember Fraser and Walker? You get props to this lady. Do you remember what she did?
Yeah, she forged her husband's signature.
Yeah.
And she got the second or the other mortgage and kept some of the money for herself, and forgot about paying off the second mortgage.
Yes.
So poor old hubby lost a lot.
Right. It doesn't tell you if they divorced acrimoniously, though, does it? One would assume so. Yes. So, unfortunately, it was held that registration was effective to vest title, even though he had acquired the interest under an instrument that was void for fraud. So that was the British case, which was then followed in Brescavar and Wall. Anyone remember the facts of Brescavar and Wall?
Yeah, that was where the owners of the property handed over a transfer signed without a buyer's name, and the person who got it then put the grandson's name and registered it in the grandson's name, and then on-sold the property from there. Yep. And then a third party didn't know about it, so again, they lost out because of indefeasibility. Yep,
exactly. And they, to some extent, relied on the point from Fraser for that. Yeah, more shenanigans going on. So we have very clear direction from the High Court there that regardless of how problematic the transfer documents itself is, and whether it's affected by fraud, contravention of the Stamp Act, you name it, once you're on title, that's it. So as they said there, the person that registers by virtue of fraud, they will hold title that is vulnerable to the person that they have defrauded. But apart from that, their registration is good for the rest of everybody else, unassailable to all the world. So when the final company marched in and bought the property, bona fide purchaser for value without notice of the fraud, of the two competing equities. So once the fraudulent person was registered on title, the defrauded couple, poor old Mr. and Mrs. Brescovar, their interest in the property was relegated to a mere equity in the property. And so you had this competing equity between Brescovar and the ultimate purchaser. And of the two, the court said that the ultimate purchaser's equity should prevail. Does anyone remember why?
Yeah, because of the conduct of handing over a signed transfer without any name or anything on there.
Yeah, basically you're arming the other party with an instrument of fraud, aren't you? So, and given that on the other hand, the other competitor in the equity race was completely, had no notice of the fraud and had bought the property bona fides, there was no tussle really. It was the ultimate purchaser that won out. So yeah, okay, there are some protections for fraud here, aren't there? And this is the message of the Torrens title system that is encapsulated in obviously the Land Titles Act, section 184. But really, how does the e-conveyancing thing cut across this? After looking at that article, what would you say about the Torrens system? Do you think that it's adversely impacted by e-conveyancing?
No, not really. I think the e-conveyancing system actually alleviates that issue because it forces the process down a particular path, and there is very strong institutions in there where everything has to be qualified and signed and information validated before each step can go through. So it sort of takes away those issues.
Yeah. Anyone else have any other views on that?
Yeah, the system's as good as the user. There are the checks that you've got to do. There's the verification of identity checks. But what if your client's interstate? What if they don't use a proper verification of identity person? How do you get the correct verification of identity? Are you signing off on something that's potentially fraud that you're unaware of yourself? So the system's as good as the user.
Yeah, and that's the weak link, isn't it? I appreciate that. I appreciate Nick's point in that I think the danger in e-conveyancing doesn't necessarily, it's not that it necessarily takes away from indefeasibility. I appreciate that point, and that's a nice little fine distinction to make. But I think what it does do is that it leaves the buyer and seller somewhat vulnerable at certain points in the transaction. And it seems to me that PEX has done a pretty good job of stitching up its security. Where the big risk, I think, still lies is, as Tanya said, in the users, the subscribers to the PEXA system.
That's the issue with any online system, mate. It doesn't matter. Look,
I know.
Most of the online systems that are good because they're structured properly and they push the user through a certain process, right?
Yes, and that's why I take your point that it does push settlement to conclusion. And once that baby's locked, once that workspace is locked, it pushes everything down a funnel, really.
But Tanya's right too. The issue in the system is not necessarily the system, it's the human component. Yes. Right? It's the human component. And at the end of the day, that's the lawyer or the client or whatever. So, and all downfall in all of these electronic systems is always user error.
Yeah, exactly. But see here, user error didn't actually result in a problem with the title itself. Because as you said at the start, that process funnels you down a pathway and there's no escape. Once that workspace is locked, you're heading down registration land. There's no way you're not, unless there's a problem with last minute, problem with funding, or I don't know, something else that goes wrong. There's almost no way that you can not end up at registration. So it's not, I don't think that the risk really lies in detracting from the notion of indefeasibility. And that's where I think, Nick, your original response was probably good. But what e-conveyancing, I think, does do, like everyone seems to agree, is that it introduces other risks that aren't catered for in the legislation. And I think that's where PEXA and others have been scratching around to try and find an answer. What they've done now is that PEXA has, it's funny, we should start, this is a nice little circle of tutorial discussion because we can finish here. What PEXA has done is they've introduced an app, Nick, you'll be pleased to know, which is meant to be used by subscribers to communicate confidential information in relation to bank details.
Yeah, so it's an app with a 2FA, right? Two-factor authentication, so that only the user that's supplying the documents can verify it properly.
I don't know the technical side of it, but they are saying that it exceeds world standards, and there's a guarantee of safety if you use this app. Let me just get the little blurb on it here. I'll put all of this study guide, this answer guide up for you, just so don't worry about that. Okay.
Yeah, after the thing that happened with those parties that lost the money, they actually then introduced two-factor authentication, even just to sign into PEXA to get onto the workspace
Yes.
in the first place. That was a huge change that they made after that occurred.
Yeah, learn from your mistakes, don't you? Yes, they did. There was a number of different protocols, I understand, that were tightened up on the PEXA side of things. But really, the problem wasn't PEXA's. The problem in that particular circumstance was user error. So this PEXA key, and I've got a little link here. I don't know whether it'll open. So there you go. There's the app. Looks all very friendly. And this just tells you a little bit about it. But when was this? Yeah, 2019. So it's relatively recent. I guess it took them a while, but they rolled it out in beta and they did some testing on it. And I guess they needed to be very, very sure that it was going to perform at the level that they needed it to perform at.
Yeah, they would have had to get PCI compliance with the banking industry, because the banking industry uses something similar. Like on my online accounts, there's username and password, like most people. Then there's a 2FA, so it sends a message to my phone that I've got to verify. And then when I get to the actual login screen, I have an RSA key, which is similar to that PEXA key. And that changes every 30 seconds on a device that's handheld.
Oh, yes, I've got one of those as well.
You've got to type that in as well. So it's just, that's pretty much what they're doing, just in a reverse format.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, I guess they've learnt a little late that, you know, hackers are out there, but who knew? I mean, like you said earlier, you know, it's not as though this is a new risk. It was just unfortunately one that wasn't contemplated early on. So that's the interface of e-conveyancing with the whole Torrens system and indefeasibility. I wouldn't be surprised if there was some legislative response to this. But the other way that you're protected, I guess, as a buyer and seller using this regime is by virtue of the lawyers or the conveyancers insurance fund. So, you know, I guess you're not completely bereft of remedy if things go awry like they did in the Venn case. Anyone have any queries on all of that? Quite interesting, isn't it? Well, maybe I'm odd. I find that interesting. I can stop screen sharing now.
Did they ever catch the perpetrators of that?
I don't think they did.
No.
I don't think they did, because it would bounce out of. They'd get the funds. Yeah, they'd just bounce it out. So I guess I don't know whether they could trace that. Maybe
they did trace it. They did trace it, and they got 88% of the money back.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, so they got most of it back, but they didn't get it all back, and they didn't catch the fraudsters either, because
No, I didn't think
they were IP pinging it about 60 different addresses around the globe using a Tor and torrent network.
Wow. Well, you know, it's good work if you end up with 250 grand at the end of it, isn't it? And I don't know if it was the same people, but there was a $1 million transaction that got hacked about 3 weeks before the Venn contract. So
that's what I don't understand. Like, how could they not miss $1 million over 3 weeks and then not rectify that? Surely. And unless the guy that lost $1 million was a billionaire and didn't even realise $1 million was lost, and he bought another property and didn't realise he'd done it. Because, I mean, I don't know about you, but if I lost $1 million, I'd know about it immediately.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know whether that person tried to have a swing at PEXA as well. Unsure. He may well have. I mean, remember in the first agreement between PEXA and Venn and Burgess, they had a gag order. So you don't know what kind of things happened between that person and PEXA, whether there was any settlement there either.
Speaking of the actors we've been speaking of, I don't know if you've seen it. I'll just put a link up there. I thought you might like that, Amanda, if you haven't seen it. It's on the first case in 1886 in regards to that exact issue under the original Section 69 of the Real Estate Property Act 1886 in regards to torrents and indefeasibility.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
I'll go and have a look at that. I've copied the link. I'll go and have a look after that.
Yeah, it's quite a good, quick read.
Sweet. Thank you. Thanks for being so enthusiastic, people. It was lovely to chat. No further questions? I'll go and have a refreshing beverage and a nice meal, and put your feet up in front of the fire.
And
Go.
Thanks, AJ.
No worries. Have a good week, guys.
Bye.
Bye.